All right, everybody, welcome to KM Carnivore interviews. This is our very first interview. We're going to see how this goes, but um, I want to thank you for joining us today. With me is a very special guest, Brett Smith. Has been doing this a little bit and has a lot of really great knowledge to share with us. Has a couple different websites we'll get into, or YouTube channels. One by himself and one with a doctor cardiologist friend of his. So this should be interesting. But Brett, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be your inaugural interview maiden voyage.
Well, thank you. So why don't we start with kind of what happened and how you kind of found low carb slash carnivore and just kind of walk us through what that looked like for you.
Okay. Well, I come out of, you could say professionally, out of the health insurance universe. A year out of college in 1987, I joined Cigna Insurance, and I've been on both the insurance company side, I've been on the insurance brokerage consulting side, and then I got into a niche. After a year in pharmaceutical, I got into a niche of the population health management world, which encompasses both the corporate wellness industry and the disease management industry. And I spent first 10 years and then another two in that industry. And what kind of is my origin story with all of this is in October, the last week of October 2018, the four siblings got together for my sister's 65th birthday party. And we went to a restaurant and I saw my brother for the first time in about 4 months, younger brother. And in that 4 month period of time, he had dropped like 30, 35 pounds. It was incredibly noticeable. And I, at the time, just to kind of tell you, because the very next day, this picture of me, the before picture of being morbidly obese, 6'3" and 130 plus pounds, or 330 plus pounds. Um, that's how I looked when I was at this sibling dinner. And my brother said, well, I've been doing this low carb keto thing. And I'm like, that's really fascinating because I've never heard anybody say low carb or keto to me before. And I had spent 10 years in the population health management, wellness, disease management worlds. And I'm like, oh, this must be some fad, crazy diet that he's doing because I don't know these words and I lived in this industry. I'd been now 5 years out of the industry, but I was 10 years in the industry. So anyhow, the reason that obese picture of me was taken is the next day I drove to Chicago with a college buddy of mine who was on my college tennis team. And we were playing in a national platform tennis, also known as paddle tournament. And after a number of years of being functionally fat, and 2 years earlier, at 53 years old, we finished fifth in the nation in the 45 and over age category. So we were very old for the 45 at that point in time. And, somewhere if I pull it out, I've got a framed thing saying fifth in the nation. Just hasn't made my bookshelf yet. So, or a wall, because as you're well aware, I don't put a lot of nails in my walls here. But anyhow, I wind up deciding, or excuse me, I now go play that tournament, and 2 years later, I've had four meniscus surgeries, two on each knee, and I've got major arthritis going on in each knee. And after a number of years of just kind of joking with myself, saying, well, you're functionally fat, 'cause I'm still competing with college age tennis players on the tennis court, playing doubles. And I'm ranked in paddle. I'm playing, getting into pickleball and doing well. And all of a sudden, all the wheels fall off, and I now suck. and I can't hang, and I feel real bad because my buddy, we went down to Chicago, took day off of work to go do this, and I now was just a shell of my former self. And so I come home from that tournament that weekend, and it's now Sunday. And I'm like, well, what did my brother do? What is this low carb keto thing? And I start looking into it. And it scared the living bejeebers out of me because after a year in pharma and 10 years in the corporate wellness, plus understanding the whole actuarial aspect of health insurance and life insurance and what goes into all of the actuarial and underwriting calculations of is somebody insurable or not, or a group insurable, and how do we create rates for all of this? You know, I'm just like, what did he do? And like everybody else, like everybody in the medical community, I'll now use the words I and they, I was, and they most still are, gaslit into believing things that just aren't really so. It took me a while to figure it out. So what happens is I start looking at what is this low carb keto thing that I've never heard of before. So of course it must be a fad diet. And I'm paying attention to it. And at first, the first things that catch me is in the community, as you start getting into the layers of the onion of all of this, it's like, well, saturated fat is actually really healthy, they're saying, and you don't have to really worry about LDL. It's taken out of context. And, you can look at hundreds of studies that don't support that. And I'm just like, wait a minute. I come from the disease management world. I sold the guidelines. This, right here, you and I are both in the greater Milwaukee area. Freighter, it's one of the dominant healthcare systems. I sold them their disease management program. I sold Aurora their corporate wellness program. I understand what the guidelines say, and the guidelines do not say eat saturated fat and definitely worry about your LDL. And so I'm like, oh my God, my brother's going to die of a fad diet. He's going to be a skinny guy in a casket. I have to save his ass. And so I go, well, when I was in these worlds, I was selling technically, we called them corporate wellness programs, but they were predictive modeling algorithms. So we had 40 different disease states that the doctor who created those programs. His name is Dr. Raymond Gavry, and he also wrote this coach certification program that was taught at University Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We'll get into that later. But
Interesting.
he created these predictive modeling algorithms that, with understanding you answering questions from a health risk assessment in a 40 chemistry blood panel, with all of that data, we could then figure out whether you are at no risk, moderate, high, medium risk, or probably already have something that you're just unaware of, that you have a disease, you just don't know you have it yet. And that was the predicate of what he created and what I sold. So my job was to go to every, like, Aurora and Freighter across the country and to call on all the big brokerage and consulting houses that worked with employers of anywhere from 250 to 100,000 employees and get them to use our programs. So I'm just like, well, I have to save my brother's life because obviously he's doing something really stupid. And so I just go, well, I'll go into PubMed, which is the government's database of all published medical research. I learned this through my pharma and the predictive modeling algorithm days. And I go, I'll find the definitive studies that show him that he's doing something woefully wrong. And I'll save his life. And as I, in November and December of 2018, put about 60 hours into those 2 months, it started just kind of, I'm a huge mystery fan. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love Tom Clancy. I love John Grisham type stuff. And anything where there's a story and there's a, Murder on the Orient Express, I just love that kind of shit. And so I'm just like, well, something's going on here, because the deeper and deeper I dive into the science, there isn't quick and easy definitive studies that are actually predicated on good data. And the predictive modeling algorithms are all about understanding the hierarchy of data in medical research. And I'm just like, oh my God, all these things we kind of believe and are taught are sitting on quicksand. They're not on great foundation. So in November, I started kind of realizing that things are screwed up. So I started buying into the premise, and the premise of keto and low carb is drop your carbs. And what that really means is drop your garbage carbs. There are some carbs that aren't as immediately detrimental to us as humans as other carbs. And so I started cutting out the processed and the Twinkies and the Doritos and the ultra
All the
processed,
good stuff.
the stuff we're all addicted to, and that we've all been taught is just delicious and we should be able to have it whenever we want. And so I
Right.
started cutting that out, and then I decided, because of seeing the morbidly obese me, and you have to realize that when you're a corporate, when you're running sales and marketing and you're on stage and you're presenting in front of all these large companies and everything, you don't look like an aerobics instructor, it kind of messes with you a little mentally. And so here, all of a sudden, I'm starting to realize why over 25 years I went from being a little overweight to moderately overweight, and I could lose 30 pounds but put 40 back on, and lose 30 and put 40 back on, and do that a number of times. Before you know it, you're really big. So all of a sudden, once I kind of realized, oh my God, my brother found the Holy Grail, but couldn't explain it to me. I've now done enough deep dive to kind of think that I have this somewhat a little bit understood. And I go, 1-1 is when people do their New Year's resolution. So I jumped in. I said, 1-1, I'm going to be 100% clean. And what I thought that meant at that time was about 30 net carbs. And then I understood, I found Dr. Eric Westman out of Duke University. And he
Mm.
actually grew up here in Wisconsin like us, and from the Madison area, and we have mutual friends. And I got to meet him in October at, I'm wearing the t-shirt, the Metabolic Revolution. We can talk about that later, maybe. But he was there, and about 14 other low carb leading advocates in the world presenting. And I realized there's a difference between net carbs and total carbs, and that the secret to success in medical strength ketosis is being 20 total carbs or under a day. So I immediately adjusted, figured out what the difference between 30 net and 20 total is. And long story short, I dropped 115 pounds in the next 9 months. And that's all by itself a miraculous story, and pretty freaking cool. Um, but then it really gets interesting and gets into reversing a number of conditions as we dig a little deeper. Let me know if you'd like me to go there.
I got a question I have for you is what was your heaviest weight that you were in the past? And where, let's just say since 2018, where's your bottom?
Well, I don't know that I can officially honestly answer it for a couple of reasons. One is the scale that was in my house didn't go over 300. And but the scale at Planet Fitness did go over 300. And I was so it took me a couple of weeks until I actually got there. And in a routine manner, to where I'd shower up and use the scale there. I'm guessing I got over 330 pounds, because I knew I dropped some weight, and I was already 227 on the Planet Fitness scale. So I knew I pushed 330 at some point in time. But you have to also understand, I used to be a really, what you would call a skinny string bean kind of a guy. I used to be short, and I used to be just vapor thin. At the end of freshman year in high school, I was 5'3" and 103 pounds. We all got measured and weighed for gym class in March for wrestling, so that you had somebody comparable size to
Mhm.
wrestle against in gym class. So that's how I knew at that point in time what I was. And then I grew 7 inches that year. And by the time I graduated high school, I was 6'2" and 140 pounds. I mean,
Wow.
that's really, really thin. And I graduated college 6'3", an inch taller, and 167 pounds, but got up to 185 at one point. There was a summer I taught tennis at a country club where I was able to have root beer malts and shakes every day and onion rings and all of these different things as much as I really wanted to. And I wasn't working out all that much. And I probably put on 25 pounds that summer, but then got back to college and into practice and working out and running and everything. And um, lost it all. So yeah, I was really thin until coming out of college. And then I did what you would call I filled out. And which is really just a polite way of saying I started putting on weight that because I was 6'3", I could hide it under a suit coat. And nobody really, looked close enough to realize that
Mhm.
that I wasn't ripped or shredded or anything like that. I wasn't putting on positive bulk. I was putting on fat. So that's how big I got at that at any one point and time. And that was my heaviest, where you just saw my before and after picture with the 115 pounds. So I got down to 215 at what you would call my bottom level. And but during that 6, 8 months before getting to there, I had started I had realized, and there's a motto that I kind of live by, that muscle is the currency of aging. And the more muscle you can have later in your life, the more you can clear the glucose in your bloodstream, and the less likely you are to become frail and break a hip and die young, and all of the different things that lead to sarcopenia and all of these different things. So I got some religion around, and because I used to be this really skinny, no muscle massed guy, I'm like, well, if I'm going to get thin, I don't want to just go back to being a beanpole. I'd like to have some kind of a physique. So I started lifting. And I wasn't an expert at lifting or anything like that, but I lifted 5 to 6 days a week, different muscle groups. And I did DEXA scans a couple of different times over the time. And I realized I put on, over about a 4 or 5 year period of time, ballpark 20 pounds of muscle over where that 215 was. So I was able to maintain, I went from a 46, 44 waist, depending upon which pair I was wearing, down to a 34, 36. So I dropped 10 waist
Mhm.
sizes. And the shirts started fitting differently because once you have a little bit of a chest and a back, instead of stretching things at the bottom when you're fat around your gut, I'm starting to fill out the top part of shirts, and went from double XLs down to, depending upon what it was, sometimes a medium, sometimes larges. And so that was a great feeling from buying clothes that I should be wearing instead of what a morbidly obese person wears. So yeah, that's kind of
So,
where that went.
so, so as you were going, when you started, what were like the biggest challenges that you had personally in, let's just say, the first 3 months? Like, what were the things that you had to really fight through, if anything?
Well, the funny thing is, you could almost say where you just qualified with anything because of the little nugget I gave you a minute ago of saying I became a morbidly obese person who spent 10 years in the corporate wellness world. I wasn't morbidly obese at that time. That happened in the 5 years after leaving, but I was I was an obese and overweight individual. And I would get talking to from the two owners, Brett, you need to drop a couple pounds. You need to look like the role. I go, neither one of you look like the role either. Anyhow, so it weighed on me. And I think that was probably enough motivation to, once I figured out, I go, oh, now from a biochemistry, from a human physiology standpoint, I'm now putting together why most of the world is overweight and has all of these chronic medical conditions. Suddenly the light bulb went off. And for me to now go back to, because I still considered myself an athlete in my brain, even though I wasn't able to act like one, that was enough motivation for me to say, let me look like what I should look like again.
Mhm.
But then 3 months later, I got an injection into my arm of some knowledge that made sure I would forever never stray far from what I learned.
Got it. Um, and then what, like, you just said that you had like this aha thing, right? And I had an aha thing, and I have a video on my channel about that, called The Inconvenient Truth About Sugar. And I kind of talk about my aha moment where it all made sense to me. What was your like aha moment?
Well, I've got two of them, and one plays into the other. And so the very first one was as I was doing that first 60-hour deep dive in November, December of 2018. The first real big one, and this is why this book stays right here where it's always visible. So this is Dr. Sarah Hallberg. And Dr. Sarah Hallberg was at the University of Indiana, Purdue, and she ran for IU in obesity and disease management research. And as I was getting into all of this and trying to figure all this out, I found a TED Talk presentation that she gave on YouTube that was entitled, and everybody should, that's not aware of this, spend 20 minutes, go find this YouTube of that TED Talk, called To Reverse Diabetes, You Have to Ignore the Guidelines. And this is what helped break my brain in 2018. Break my brain from the old paradigm, the gaslit experience that I was in, that all medical people and pharma people and dietitian people and coach people live in, the calorie in, calorie out paradigm, that, you're just eating too many calories and you're not moving enough. And I'm like, wait a minute, ignore the guidelines. I sold the guidelines. I go, you mean the guidelines are wrong? And so that was my very first epiphany, where I really realized that the data supports that 90% of what doctors are taught about, not about everything, but about managing chronic diseases, is upside down and on its head, which is what makes it the most profitable money-making thing that humans have ever experienced in the history of humanity. Which is why it also isn't going to go away, because the owners of the systems love the profit. And
Right.
now doctors eventually sometimes figure it out on their own. Sometimes it waits until they wind up coming against what they were taught and realizing they're doing what they were taught and it doesn't work for them or their family member that's struggling or whatever. And then they put two and two together, like I did seeing my brother. So that was the first part of my epiphany, is that I realized that our guidelines are just wrong. And the average primary care doctor, internal medicine doctor, winds up doing far more harm than they do good in this world, because things that they're taught are not the things that we should be measuring, not the things we should be looking at. It doesn't identify disease until 15 to 20 years down the rabbit hole, where the horse is out of the barn. We're not talking about being, something easy modifiable lifestyle modification and wipe it out while you're in your 20s. We're waiting to the 40s and 50s to find something, because we're measuring glucose levels, and that's not the thing to be measuring. We should be measuring insulin levels and insulin resistance. And so HOMA IRs and, C-reactive proteins and these different types of things. But that's not what primary care looks at. Well, not what they're taught to care about. And so as I lost in the first 6 weeks, I dropped 38 pounds. And all of a sudden I'm like, God, pretty soon I look like I might be able to pass as a wellness person, somebody in this industry again. So I started interviewing and calling around, and I realized all the people that I'm talking to, I figured in the 5 years I was out of the industry, everybody must have figured all this out. And because I was not there anymore, I just missed out on it. So what happens is I wind up getting a job with a company in the kidney disease management world. This is their coffee mug. And I'm all super excited, because I'm like, nobody knows this yet. And this leads into my second part of my epiphany story here, in that I realized that I can go in at the moment. So I just sign on the dotted line electronically, and I'm in my office, and I'm like pacing back and forth because I'm all amped up. I'm like, I'm about to rejoin the world. I'm going to teach everybody what I've just learned, and I'm going to save the world. I thought, here I come, look out. And all of a sudden, so I start to say to myself, I go, I'm about, another 4 or 5 months at this amount of weight loss. I'm going to be a normal looking, thin looking guy again. And I was about to say, and I'm about to be bulletproof because I wasn't on a hypertension medication. I wasn't on a metformin or another glucose medication for diabetes. And as I'm about to hit bulletproof in my brain, two different things fired at that time, which is my other second epiphany here. So Dr. Sarah Hallberg, she got found by a billionaire who wanted to change the world. This billionaire created a company like Zillow, sold it to Zillow, which made him a billionaire. And he was a huge endurance fitness guy, and he had just won back in 2012-ish, somewhere around there, the Ironman competition for the over 50 age category in Honolulu, which is the biggest Ironman competition. You have to win other Ironman competitions to compete at this one. He's probably in better shape than 98% of Division I scholarship athletes and Olympic athletes that are at normal gold medal contention world.
And he's in his 50s.
But he's 50 years old. And so he comes back from winning this thing, and he has his normal physical, and his doctor says, well, you're almost a full type 2 diabetic. You have a 6.4 hemoglobin A1C. He goes, I'm the fittest 50-year-old in the world. How can I be like a diabetic? And it blew his mind. So he went and he started deep diving this, very bright, intelligent guy. And he found the two doctors that I found early in my deep dive, Dr. Jeff Volek and Dr. Stephen Phinney, who wrote the two different books. This one's called The Art and Science of Low Carb Living. And they've got another one on athletic performance as low carb athletes. And then together, the three of them found Dr. Sarah Hallberg, and Finney was off stage when she did her TED Talk. And they recruited her, and she became the chief medical officer of a company called Virta, VIRTA, Virta Health. And they were going after, at the time, from 2015 through their launch, as I found them end of 18. And they had multiple years now of data of what they were able to do. And they were going to corporate America saying, give us your type 2 diabetics. We're going to give them back to you without medications, healthy, and we're going to save you like $12,000 per diabetic you give us on your health claims in the year. And I'm just sitting here going, oh my God, if that's really achievable, that's incredible. So when I was saying bulletproofs, all of a sudden I'm realizing, well, if one of the fittest 50-year-olds in the world is a diabetic, and then the other thing that hit me when I said two things hit me is when I was in college, my roommate was on the track and cross country team when I was on the college tennis team. And the number one selling book at that time was The Complete Book of Running by Jim Fixx. And when I was just 2-3 years out of college, Jim Fixx died of a heart attack on a 5K run looking like a Greek god. Just ripped, shredded, looked incredibly healthy. But he had atherosclerotic plaque in his arteries. He died of a heart attack on his 5K run. And I'm like, and so those two things hit me at that time because I've been thinking those things for a couple of months. And I'm just like, I don't know if I'm bulletproof, because you can look absolutely great and healthy, look like a Greek god, and keel over the next day. So all of a sudden,
Right.
I'm like, you're being a moron. You're sitting here and you're pretending like you got things figured out. And so I go,
But the light bulb had gone on, right? You kind of figured it out, like what the root cause of a lot of this a lot of
Well,
these issues were, right?
I think I had in everything, and I was still living within the cognitive dissonance of none of us believe that this will ever happen to us. It's always
Mhm.
going to happen to the other guy. And so anyhow, but I just said, well, the way I can get rid of all of this conflict in my brain is 10 years earlier when I had started in the corporate wellness world, when we did our predictive modeling algorithms and we found people that were high risk for heart disease, we would tell them, here, go to your doctor and ask for a CT heart scan. It's kind of like a mini MRI. It does a snapshot of the arteries in and out of your heart. And if there's plaque in them, you've now identified you have coronary artery disease, you have atherosclerotic plaque, and now we can be treating an actual disease. And if you don't have it, you're pretty much almost, hate to use this word again, bulletproof for the next 10 years, because that's what the belief was. So I just go, well, I'll just go and get another heart scan because 10 years earlier, at 45, I had zero plaque. And I should qualify that by saying I had zero calcified plaque, because there's two different kinds of plaque. There's soft plaque, which is actually the most dangerous. And it, through aging and not having all the right things going on inside of your body physiologically, it eventually calcifies and becomes less dangerous plaque. But it's the soft plaque that you really need to be aware of. Anyhow, so I went and got another heart scan. 2 days later, they call me back. Mr. Smith, you have a calcium score of 268, which is smack dab in intermediate, 100 being intermediate, beginning of intermediate, 400, the end of it, over 400, you're high risk, under 100, you're low risk. I'm like, shit, over the last 10 years, I just really destroyed myself because I went from zero plaque to having enough that you need to pay attention and worry about what's going on. So my second epiphany was, not only are our guidelines all wrong and upside down, and we're looking at a number of different things through the wrong filters, I now, instead of just wanting to look like a thinner guy again and not look like a morbidly obese guy, I go, I need to save my life, because doctors don't believe, there's not a cardiologist that I was aware of on the planet that for the most part believed you can reverse these things and get rid of these things. But there were enough people in the metabolic health space that believed you could do all of it that I was aware
Mhm.
of. So that became my second epiphany and my second thing of where, well, this is really a lifelong battle for me, because it's one thing to walk around, whether you think you got an extra 10 pounds or an extra 50 pounds or an extra 100 pounds on you. It's a whole nother thing to say, I want to keep waking up tomorrow, and I want to be at my granddaughter's weddings in 20 and 30 years, and
Right.
their kids. And that's what it's really all about. So that was really what kind of made sure that I then became really anal and really obsessed with understanding every in and out of the science of what do I need to do to cure the plaque in my arteries.
Right. And like one of the things I've realized over the 2 years of being carnivore is that it's not all about losing weight, because just like your two marathon guys and your Ironman guy, they looked like Greek gods, but they weren't healthy on the inside. And weight is a symptom of the problem, but it's not necessarily the problem. And what I want people to understand that watch this video is that there's a lot more going on inside, with glycation and other things from your diet that are being hidden, even if you're in shape, if your blood sugars are off or you're eating the wrong foods, that these can creep up and get you, just like your marathon guy who died at 50 doing a 5K, who was in fantastic shape. But it's I'm just trying to get the awareness out that there's a lot more to the healing process than just what the scale says. And I know, like, for you, you started keto, which was low carb, but you still had vegetables. And I know you made certain type of breads and different things that were low carb. So you were able to to stay at that low carb or nutritional ketosis, where for me, I jumped in, 2 years ago, March 1st here, a couple days ago, full on carnivore, and basically was no carbs for the first three three months or so, and reversed a whole bunch of stuff, and then got a lot better with the things I was trying to do. But um I guess you started low carb and then did some carnivore after we met. And but I want people to understand that even though this is a carnivore channel and I do carnivore, that there are other ways to be healthy, and you just have to do whatever works for you. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, don't eat this or don't eat that, but you do need to keep your carb in check, and like, for example, last summer, I had 2 beers every night while I was grilling my steak, but my 2 beers equaled 22 carbs. I had no carbs during the day at all. I counted those as my 20 carbs for the day, and I still lost weight, and I still, you know, have gotten healthier in that process by doing that. But that's what worked for me. Now, I also found out that, not eating vegetables has really healed my intestines and my stomach, that I didn't even realize I was really sick from. But the proof is in the pudding. My intestines and my stomach have never felt better in my life. I'm gonna be 55 here on Sunday, and I can honestly say that not eating vegetables for the last basically 2 years has been a godsend for me. And it wasn't because I don't like them. I love almost every food on the planet. I
Me too.
like,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
but my stomach doesn't like that, especially my large intestine. And I can tell how inflamed I was versus how awesome my intestines feel now. There's no bloating, there's no inflammation, there's no bleeding, there's no nothing. I've talked about it on a couple of the podcasts I've been on. Like, I almost never have gas anymore, which is awesome, you know. And it's just things like that. So I want people to understand that it's more, for me, it's more low carb than it is carnivore, even though I am carnivore. It's whatever is going to work for that person to
Can
get
I
their
take a
blood
little
sugars
stab a
in
little
line.
stab at fleshing this out a little bit?
Yeah,
Because
go ahead.
when I mentioned early in my journey, when I first started this, I was like at a 30 net carb world. And then I realized what the difference between net carbs and total carbs was. And there's what's called medical strength and almost guaranteed success at 20 total carbs and under, that I learned again from Dr. Eric Westman. And what you really need to understand about all of this, and anybody who has been around me for any period of time, and my coaching clients, what gets hammered into their head is it's about context and nuance, because we all start, everybody that I start talking to kind of starts in a different place. And I say kind of because 92% of adult Americans in our country are not considered metabolically healthy. They have one of the 5 metabolic condition spokes in the wheel of what's called metabolic syndrome. So they either have central adiposity, they have low HDL, they have high triglycerides, they have high blood pressure, and
And
so
high insulin.
and high insulin. So these are all the things that create metabolic or that get, if you have 3 of those 5, you're considered you have metabolic syndrome. And guess what? In 2018, I had 3, if not 4 of those things. And but the thing is that depending upon where you are with your metabolic health, do you actually need metabolic therapy? Because there is a way of attacking a number of different conditions. 80% of what you and I and the rest of the population goes and sees the doctor for outside of routine physicals, which hardly anybody does, is for a condition that is a result of ongoing insulin resistance that manifested into one of 80 different disease states. And all of these conditions hardly existed. They're called diseases of modernity. So something happened since we've entered modern times, call it from 1920 till current day. The last 100 years, the world changed, and things that the population never had. Now, half the kids coming out of high school are almost pre-diabetic these days. We used to call that adult onset diabetes. So what I believe the Holy Grail comes down to is a couple of things, and one of those things is to understand that there's two different, and this is one of the crimes against humanity, what I'm about to say right here. And why most corporate wellness programs don't work, and when I earlier made the statement that completely not of their own desire, most doctors do more harm than they do good in the internal medicine primary care world, because they're looking for surrogate markers of health instead of health. And they don't understand that there's two basic physiologies because they're not taught this in school or when they're out and doing continuing education. And so every baby who is in the mother's womb since a history of being, even before Homo sapiens, since there were any form of primitive humanoid type things walking the earth for millions of years, they were in the state of what's called nutritional ketosis in the mother's womb. The mother's breast milk, which we didn't have formula until diseases of modernity creeped in. We would get a wet nurse if for whatever reason the mother couldn't breastfeed. The baby was always breastfed through all of time. And that breast milk was, 50 to 65% saturated fat, which builds big, beautiful brains. And our brain is almost made entirely out of cholesterol and fat. And so in nutritional ketosis, the body is in its best healing state, and it wasn't until the last 100 years that the bulk of the population slowly moved out of being in it most of the time to being in it hardly any of the time. And it really comes down to the carb level. So where you were kind of saying, you can be on the carnivore side of things, and then you can go one click over and be where Brett got his success in 2019. I was in the medical strength ketosis, but 20 total carb and under. So from carnivore to 20 total carb, here's the first part of the spectrum of
Right.
nutritional ketosis. Now, depending upon who we're talking to and dealing with, if we're talking with somebody who's still a young Division I athlete and doesn't have decades of garbage coming into their system, or too many decades of, aging is just advanced glycation end products. There's too high of blood sugar levels manifesting for too long, rotting us out from the inside out of our bodies. And if you stretch and you stay somewhat physically active and you eat right and you keep your blood sugars at what the body creates, because the body creates naturally through gluconeogenesis. The liver creates all the blood sugar that the body needs. We don't need to bring any of it in through our pie holes. And
Which is not what we're taught.
no,
It's not what the
nobody's taught
doctors are
that,
taught.
or the dietitians, and thus the health coaches, like what I was. This book that I showed you from Dr. Raymond Gavery, who created the company I was selling these programs to, Freighter and Aurora and hundreds of other companies around the country. He had a coach certification class that he taught at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and all of our nurses who were coaches got certified, and I got certified in this. And but I still became an overweight person, and out of the 10 years, 12 years of working with clients at Aurora, Freighter, and hundreds of others employers around the country, not once did we or any other wellness or disease management company reverse somebody's diabetes, reverse somebody's hypertension, take somebody off of dialysis who's stage 5 chronic kidney disease, help somebody remove the brain fog and start getting cognition back from Alzheimer's, stop tremors with Parkinson's. I mean, these are all things that we now in this space know can be achieved. I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
guaranteed for everybody, but vast improvement can minimally happen. But it never happened with anybody we were coaching with the old guidelines of walk another mile, eat another apple, count your calories. It's a very flawed method. So there's carnivore, call it zero carbs. There's medical strength ketosis, 20 or under carbs. There is then low carb, but which can achieve ketosis, which is like 50 carbs a day on average. Somebody, if they're living for quite a while at 50 carbs, for a part of the day, they're entering ketosis and then they cycle out of it. And then there's what's just considered low carb, which is really about 50 total carbs to about 125 a day. So somewhere in the spectrum of 0 to 125 is called low carb. And everything
Yeah.
has to do with definitions and what we call words. And this is how the medical research community messes with things, because you and I are going to play a real simple little quick game here that will make everything super evident to everybody. Jeff, because you're so much smarter than me, we're going to make you the doctor. Okay. So
Perfect.
I'm going to be the patient for a quick second here. And every time I ask you a question, you just say yes. Do you understand your role in this little exchange?
Yeah.
Beautiful. So, doctor, you're telling me that my type 2 diabetes and hypertension came from me being insulin resistant for years because of my diet. Is that true?
Yes.
So, if I address that diet and I will just call it clean things up, I can actually reverse my diabetes and my hypertension,
Yes.
meaning I can get off all these medications that I'm on and I don't have to come see you 3, 4 times a year.
Yes.
You and I just solved the whole riddle on why this doesn't get taught in medical colleges to doctors
Right. Because
and
now, as the
dietitians.
doctor, I'm going broke because you're not coming to see me. You're not on medicine and the system doesn't work. But at some point, we can't stay this way as a nation because it's unattainable to spend what we spend every year as the population only gets sicker, number one.
And
And
it's
number
cruel and
two,
unusual punishment to do this to people.
right. And number two, I'm hoping that as we're gaining momentum here with social media, and there's different avenues for that, but especially on YouTube, carnivore and low carb is getting quite a following, and we have Dave Mack over at Zero Carb, and he just did 1,000 interviews. And I'm sorry, but at some point, 1,000 interviews becomes a study. And I don't care what the professionals say, well, it's not a randomized controlled study, whatever. I don't care. Because when you have people from all over the world curing MS and curing heart disease and curing diabetes and curing whatever other ailment there is, I'm sorry, but that's eventually a study where they like it or not. Right. All of those things you're holding up there.
So right
Right.
here, when I was in Washington, D.C. at an event for the metabolic revolution, I showed my before and after, but I reversed my heart disease, my metabolic syndrome, my arthritis, my tinnitus, my benign prostatic hyperplasia, BPH, where guys get up and go to the bathroom 12, 2 to 3 times to 15
Mhm.
times a night. And all of the things that a couple minutes ago I said are a result of us just basically eating crap for decades, and it rots out our bodies and it manifests into all of these different conditions. The body also has an inherent ability to heal. And so the closer you are to the zero carb, the carnivore aspect of it, you're putting the less things that are problematic in. And a book that I grabbed a second ago off of when you were talking about not eating vegetables. Now, in my first couple years, I ate still a decent, I'd have a plate where I'd have ribs or steak or fish or eggs, and then I'd have some Brussels sprouts and asparagus or broccoli on the side. Um, and it worked for me, and I reversed my heart disease, and I got rid of all of my soft plaque in my arteries and started whittling away some of the calcified plaque in my arteries, blowing away doctors' minds. And I share another podcast. So I have two different podcasts. One, just like you see on my name here, Brett at My Metabolic
Mhm.
Life. You go to YouTube, My Metabolic Life, you'll find my solo podcast. In 2019, the year I lost all that weight, there's a guy who I grew up with 3 years younger than me, but we used to take tennis lessons together. We used to teach at country clubs as tennis pros together. And we played adult state open and closed tournaments as doubles partners together. And we're playing pickleball in 2019. That year, I'm losing all the weight. And he's hearing what I'm doing. And with what I used to be taught as a coach, what he's taught as a cardiologist, he thinks I'm doing something wildly crazy and dangerous. But guess what? That year he had a heart attack and he never looked like he was overweight. And so it took me about 4 or 5 months because I said in 2018, I broke my brain. Since 2019 forward, there's a number of doctors in my inner circle of people I know, and I've broken their brains, and I helped him figure out why, as a cardiologist, he had a heart attack and how to reverse that. And so now we co-host a second podcast on YouTube and soon to be many other places called the Metabochondriacs. And but where I was going with all of this and going with the spectrum from 0 to 125 carbs, at 50, you start pretty much spending a little bit of your time, some of your time in ketosis, depending upon what you want to solve, whether it's bipolar, MS, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, or the medical problems such as the chronic kidney disease, hypertension, and so forth. You might want to be at the under 20 carb level. But even if you're in the 20 to 50 carb, there's this book called The Toxic Superfoods by Sally Norton. And she's got a master's in public health, and she's brilliant, and she's able to, she brings out in the science and the research and the studies and understanding from a biochemistry level what happens. Because when you think about, let's just say, the produce area in the grocery store, so we see all the greens, right? There's the everything from the celery to the asparagus and the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli, all in one part, that it rains intermittently through the day in the grocery store on those things to keep them cool and wet. And then there's the fruit area. Well, all those things that are the vegetables, they all were 2,000 years ago grass, various kinds of grasses that through horticulture we started manipulating, and we turned them into broccoli, asparagus, and all of these things, but they were wild grasses. And as a wild plant, if you right now walk through Yosemite or Yellowstone and go start picking up random foliage plants that you see growing and eat them, you're going to die from eating most of those things. Well, we have cultivated these things to where they don't kill us right away, but there are a number of different things, lectins, oxalates, phytonutrients, anti-nutrients, that each one of those 4 different categories of things mess with us. And as we've taken them from a small side dish on our plate, where it was the meat, fish, and the egg was the primary part of our meal, and this was the side dish, as these became more and more of the dish, they're actually so much less in nutrients than what meat, fish, and eggs have. But they also, with that anti-nutrients, some of the vitamins and minerals that you'll get from the meat, fish, and egg, if you eat it with bean, any kind of lentil bean, you're now not able to absorb some of those nutrients that are in. They're devoid in certain essential nutrients that we need, the B vitamins and such, which keeps us mentally healthy. We've got a
Mhm.
major, 45% of the population are on SSRI medications because they're not getting the B vitamins and the saturated fat to create the myelin sheath in the brain and the nerves and everything that's necessary. The things that we've demonized are the things that keep us healthy. Cholesterol,
Yeah, and
saturated fat, and protein, red meat.
yeah, and going back to Sally Norton's book, I watched a video of her on Jesse Chappis, and it was very fascinating. I knew nothing about oxalates. However, as I watched that and I listened to her explain basically what it is and what it does to your body, it was my second light bulb that went on because I started carnivore to cure calcific tendonitis in my left shoulder, which is a bone deposit in your tendon where it's not supposed to be. And for years, I ate giant bowls of salad because that's what I was told to do, even
Because it's
though,
healthy, Jeff. You're supposed to be
right,
eating it.
it's healthy. However, I was always bloated. And over a period of time, right here, it dumped all the oxalates in a spot it wasn't supposed to be. And so that made then perfect sense to me as to A, how I developed the calcific tendonitis, and then B, why carnivore basically cured that and I didn't have to have surgery. And I'm a unique story, which is why I like to tell it because I haven't heard of anybody else, and I've watched a lot of interviews and a lot of videos talk about curing calcific tendonitis from basically going carnivore, which is what it did for me. I was in a sling for a whole month. 4 months before I started carnivore, I had a cortisone shot and started carnivore and went in, and I was able to not get a second cortisone shot. And in 4 months, I was in the gym, all because I stopped the salads and I stopped putting the oxalates in, and then the carnivore helped clean it all up and get it out of me. Now, I haven't gone back to see if I still have any deposit in here. Part of it is I don't feel like paying a couple $100 out of pocket because I'm in the weight room. It doesn't hurt. So if it's still in there, I guess I kind of don't care because
You've got normal
I'm
range of
functioning.
motion, right? And you could
Correct. I got
do this back before when they
correct.
thought you needed surgery.
Correct. I was in a sling in excruciating pain as the jelly bean deposit was tearing and shredding my shoulder tendons every time I moved it because it had little razor blade edges on it. And
Right.
so I learned a lot from that video with Sally Norton, and then obviously all the other deep dive stuff I've done. Um, Talk to us just briefly about your podcast with your cardiologist friend, and some of the things that you talk about there, and then we're going to have to probably wrap this up for tonight.
Absolutely. Well, so, you know, the two different podcasts I do one with Ryan, and we get more mechanistically into what's going on inside of the body. And in my metabolic life one, which has far more currently subscribers and videos, and 20 more that are about to drop in the next 4 weeks, because I've been really busy and crazy the last 3 months recording, just not getting them out. But so what we kind of go through the deep dive of, and because I reversed my heart disease and he reversed his heart disease with nutritional ketosis, we wanted to bring that out to the world. And now we're starting to go into how it can be used as a treatment, or, well, let's put it this way: metabolic therapy. Living in nutritional ketosis is a therapy for 80 different conditions out there. And it can work also with cancer. And we're about to release one where Ryan announces that in October he was told he had prostate cancer. And he's been going down the whole nutritional ketosis metabolic therapy. But metabolic therapy is more than just ketosis. My last 2.5 years, I've really gone down the rabbit hole of what you would call both circadian biology and quantum biology, and understanding how things like grounding, being having bare feet touch at some point in time to the earth. Now, right now, it's March, and it's not really a great time in Wisconsin to be walking around barefoot for 30 minutes a day, but you can get grounding mats and there's things you can do. You want to get sunrises as soon as it's coming up in the day all year round as much as possible, 5-10 minutes a day minimum of that into your eyes. There's hydrogenated water and deuterium depleted water. And then there's hyperbolic oxygen therapy treatments. So all of these different things that are part of quantum biology and circadian biology also play into metabolic therapy and nutritional ketosis. They all plug and are interchangeable with each
Mm-hmm.
other in many different ways, because just from heavy tech usage, you can become insulin resistant if you're always looking at your phone, your computer screen, your big screen TV with Netflix, and our neon lights that we have instead of incandescent bulbs.
Right.
All
Yeah,
of it,
me right now with the light on in my phone. It's
this
9 o'clock at night.
we have toxic amount of blue lights that you and I in our teens and 30s didn't have to worry about, but since our 40s and on, when we moved, now we're bringing the incandescence bulb back, thank God. I just heard that recently. But, so that's cleaning up some of our terrain. But so Ryan and I get much more into what is advanced glycation end products? What is the result of having high glucose levels in your bloodstream? And what does that do? Just like when you cut an apple and you watch the oxidative stress, brown the apple,
Mhm.
glucose continuous levels in your bloodstream, which you can measure through a continuous glucose monitor, or somebody could pick up, I don't have my little boxes out on my table, but you can pick up a Keto Mojo where you can do a little finger prick and test your blood levels of glucose and ketone levels.
Yep,
And
and we do that, and that's great. It's a very good tool.
you can measure all of this stuff, but basically aging, and when people say, well, you're just getting older. No, you can be 80s, 90s, and up to over 100 years old and still feel great if you're not polluting yourself with 90% of what they sell at Pick and Save, Sendix, and Walmart's, if you're a
Right,
Milwaukee person, or Kroger
right.
or Publix, depending upon where you live in the country. But 90% of what we sell that we have been conditioned as to what is food is something that we can use to create glucose and a form of energy, but there's a lot of toxic dyes and other things, but it just
Mhm.
spikes our glucose. And when we're over a normal homeostatic level of glucose in our body, that creates advanced glycation end products. And so we have an episode all completely on that. And so we get into basically how diet and lifestyle cripples the inside of your body and destroys the inside of your body. And because instead of me being a marketing PR guy for my whole career, sales and marketing guy, I've got a cardiologist who credits me for saving his life. And that's kind of a cool thing. And we've known each other for a long time. And he eventually moved out to Provo, Utah about 4 years ago. But we have the Metabochondriacs channel, and that's what we talk about. And we're trying to help wake up because, other doctors like him, because he sees so many patients in a day. And over the last 5 years, he says that he has, in the last 5 years, had 100-fold improvement in what he's worked with patient results than his first 20 years of practicing medicine. It's just not even remotely close. And for me, myself, every time that I can break a doctor's brain and help them understand the couple of little things that they weren't taught in med school and teach them this, now suddenly they become healers. They get people off of medications and let the body heal and
Mhm.
realize here's what's causing your problems, where 9 out of 10 doctors, 99 out of 100 doctors in this country right now don't understand this and can't talk about it. So I feel great when I go to sleep. I fall asleep in a minute every night. I wake up happy. I fall asleep happy because I know either I'm working with somebody during the day or I'm
Mhm.
eventually going to flip another doctor this year, which is going to impact 3,000 people that I'll never meet. So
Well, maybe you can flip my cardiologist here. I'm going to see him at the end of the month, and I'm working on it, with help with you. But um, maybe I'll have you come on in. But one quick thing, and then I'm going to wrap this up. But I do want to just mention quick to people that are watching this. I first heard of the grounding from you last summer when we met, and then I started watching Professor Bart K,
oh,
and that's one of his 5 things is grounding. And about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, my wife and I got some grounding mats for the bed. We got grounding mats for the desk. So when I'm at work, my arms are on this mat and I use it as my mouse pad. So I'm probably grounded 10 to 12 hours a day, as much as I can be. And I will say, after watching the Earthing movie and a couple other things, how that just ties into our evolution of being on this earth. And since the 60s when they created the rubber sole for the shoes, how we stopped grounding. And that's part of, in my opinion, goes right with the diet part of why we're where we're at. Um and the interesting part is I put this on my bed, and the first night I slept on it, the next day I woke up with, and my back was not tight. And it blew my mind because I've had a tight back every day that I wake up since I was probably 20. And I sleep with a pillow in between my legs because I'm bow legged. And so that just helps like alleviate some of the strain on my back.
sure.
However, every night since then and every morning that I wake up, my back does not hurt. And the only thing I have changed is having that grounding mat on there. And I got that at Amazon. I think it was $50 for a queen size. And to me, it's a no-brainer. Barkay will tell you it's a no-brainer. You'll tell me it's a no-brainer, tell everyone here. So for those people that are, looking to add one
I haven't
thing,
sent you a bill for that yet, have I? For that piece
no, that's what the prime rib's for, Brett.
of
So anyway, again, Brett, what are your channels where people can find you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So for the easiest way to find me without the www, https:// my metabolic life, just like it says, .com on my name here on the screen. On there, you will go to in the click on the little hamburger button in the upper right hand corner, and you can go to the podcast page where it lists the My Metabolic Life podcast, where it's just me interviewing. And that's more about stories of people like yourself and other people that have reversed almost every known condition to humanity of chronic diseases of modernity. And then you'll find also the metabochondriacs, and that stands for metabolism, mitochondria, because that's the energy source that our body uses, either the fatty
Mhm.
acids, ketones, or glucose. And that actually, if we ever do a second one, we can deep dive into why that is so important, why you want to be using where we've demonized fats and ketones. That's the primary energy source for every cell of your body. That's not a red blood cell because they don't have mitochondria. And so and maniacs. So we're maniacs about metabolism and mitochondria and what it all means and how quantum, circadian, and metabolic health all intersects right in the mitochondria. So those are our 2 podcast channels. So mymetaboliclife.com, you'll get to both of them, or you can type in My Metabolic Life or Metabochondriacs into YouTube. Hopefully within the next 6 months, they'll be available in 7 different languages and on Apple and on Rumble and everywhere else that podcasts can be found. But that's all an evolution in amount of time.
Awesome. Well, Brett, thank you so much for joining me here on this inaugural interview. I appreciate it. We will definitely do a second one where we can get into like electron transport chain and maybe some red light and stuff like that. That's maybe a little deeper dive. But thanks for sharing your story. I truly appreciate it. And I truly appreciate your friendship and everything I've learned from you. And it was a pleasure having you on my channel. So thanks again.
Love being part of your maiden voyage, and very much cherish the relationship and friendship.
Awesome. Well, you have a wonderful night. And thanks everybody for watching. Until
Have a
next time, eat meat.
good-
All right. I think I stopped it.
Says recording in the upper thing for me still.
Well, maybe I have to go somewhere else to stop it. Maybe we'll keep this on as a funny as a little thing. Oh, maybe I hit the end.
Yeah, hit
End the
end.
meeting.
Yep.
Just end it.
Yep.
All right. So much for inaugural. Have a good night.